So I feel like the abortion decision and pregnancy crisis is a realm that we don't really go into. You know, it's we talk about the abortion decisions are largely defined by things that are about sort of choices and rights and opinions, you know, the politicking and the trivialisation, but it really negates, and I think it really undermines the decision, the crisis. It's almost like it becomes an argument and it leaves the person who's needing support really exposed. Mm-hmm. And so really, if anything, do you ever hear people talk about pregnancy crisis? Outside of, you know, the websites for support, but it's so intimate to an abortion decision. And interestingly, the funny thing is, in the aftermath of a pregnancy crisis that may have led to an abortion experience, and then in 10% of cases you're dealing with abortion trauma, the first step in the process of healing is exploring the pregnancy crisis situation. Mm-hmm. Unless you explore and understand what happened, you can't get healing, you can't start the journey. And so I think today we sort of want to ask the question, you know, can you describe just generally the pregnancy crisis, what the pregnancy crisis situation looks like for a woman?
Yeah, well, listening to you, Mary, you've raised a really amazing point in the sense that it really is a preventative act for anyone to speak about a life event that is hitting them in the face at the time. You know, even if we look at mental health, we're out there, everyone is saying, you know, reach out if you've got something you need to talk about. If you're experiencing an event in your life that is difficult, reach out, talk about it. Because if you are not able to find a safe place to speak about it, you're going to be staying in a moment of shock, you know, and we all know that when you're in shock, your ability to make a decision is impaired. I don't know about you, but the first thing that comes to mind is, you know, I often am chatting with people and saying, you know, if you've had a bit of a car accident, the last thing you will do in that moment is make a life-altering decision. You'll just take some time. And so that analogy of the car crash, or often in the pregnancy help circle, the imagery that teachers and educators will use around this is the imagery of like a tornado. So not just for a woman who's facing an unplanned pregnancy, but for anyone who's facing an unexpected, disruptive life change. It's like you're in a tornado. You know? Yeah. You weren't expecting this. And bang. So the first thing is actually acknowledge, hey, I'm facing an unexpected life event here. And it's important that I take myself to a space that's going to give me that support. But like you said, how many people know that there's spaces specifically for women that are experiencing the pregnancy crisis? You know, we know we've got Lifeline if you're experiencing suicidal thoughts or any tendencies like that. But in terms of pregnancy, it's either, you know, maybe we have to we need to know what we're going to do, and then we've got to ring the line and we can choose then. And that's missed out that whole step of just...
So it becomes about choice rather than a process of working through a crisis.
Well, this is what I'm saying. If there isn't that moment of knowing who to call and where to go to get that support, you actually miss the whole process of making a fully owned choice. You can't own a choice unless you've given it due reflection. And also a true choice means that you've got alternatives to choose from. And often in that moment of shock, if, I'm facing this unplanned pregnancy and I haven't come to say you, or someone who's outside of the crisis, not my partner, not my family, because they're in shock as well, but someone who's specifically ready to listen. If I don't do that, high chances are I'm going to think, I don't have any other choice but to get rid of this problem. Because as humans, our tendency is, if you're facing an unexpected, disruptive change, you either want to ignore it or make it go away. And that's just being human. So that's where our connection, our community comes into it. And it does look unique for every person. But until you take that space, you really can't come out of that fight, flight, emotional brain into a space of going, okay, this is what I'm thinking in this moment. This is my emotional response. This is the shock. This is the panic. What's the reality? What are my choices? Unless you go somewhere that's actually going to lead you and facilitate that process, you could skip it so easily. And that's what we're finding, as you would know, with the women that are now coming to you and the men after abortion. They almost feel like they skipped that process. It happened so quickly, they didn't have a thought around it. It's in the moment, panic, we've got to do this, and before you know it, it's done.
And there's so many other feelings as well, not just the shock and the panic, two very major confronting first emotions, but you also have rejection, abandonment, fear of the loss of a relationship, fear for other children. There's so many things impacting that decision. So what are the internal things that could be going on, for a woman in pregnancy crisis? Internal and external, say. What are those, things that could be exacerbating the crisis?
Well, you've hit that nail on the head straight away with the things that you've mentioned, and that's where often those feelings and scenarios, they're not spoken out loud, so they're just happening pow, 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 with all these tornado of thoughts going round and around. And like you said, it could be, I'm not financially stable. Oh, my mum and dad or my friends, my family are just going to think I'm a major failure. I'm too embarrassed to even tell my family. I can't believe this has happened. I haven't finished my studies. I'm never going to go forward in my career. I've stuffed up my life. Really the biggest thing is like, I've stuffed up my life. What have I done?
And knocked your self-confidence there.
Yeah. And in that shock of, because it's not actually a truth, but that is the number one sense you get when you're speaking to someone going through this. It's like, I've made a mess. Like, how could I have let this happen? And then it's like, when they're in a space of a pregnancy help centre, or if they've rung that national pregnancy helpline, they will be received by someone who has studied and been trained in how to listen, how to ask the right questions to allow that woman to actually share all of her fears. And they could be completely, those are the main ones, but there are unique ones that maybe are just for that person, but typically it is all around this fear around survival. Can I provide for this child? And the shame. But that step of actually being in an environment where you can voice it then brings it into your thinking brain. It kind of gets it out of that emotional brain into this cognitive space where you can actually go, oh, I feel like my mum's going to kill me if I tell her. Oh, you mentioned your mum's going to kill you. What does that look like? Now you've said that. If you were to tell your mum, what do you think that would look like? Just allowing that space to really, let's breathe here. Let's actually go, okay, what are my overreactions? What is my panic? Where is that?
Such an interesting comment too about the mum, because, or the parent, you know, I can't tell my mum, I can't tell my parent, because the number of women that every time, you know, I would have to say 95% of the time when you're talking to young women on the phone who are experiencing abortion grief or abortion trauma, the number one thing was, you know, they didn't feel that they could tell their mum, but then, you know, with the mums that call me, and you know, you always you have the mums and, you know, the parents. I say, I just wish they had have told me.
Exactly.
And so it's just that, you know, juxtaposition of communication. It's just it's those fears to communicate. Yet the funny thing is that when you share, you are turning things from, you know, an invisibility inside yourself, internalizing all that head stuff into something very real.
Yeah, the hypotheticals to the real.
Yeah, exactly. Subjective to objective,
and
very clear.
And that's the other key note there, is that, you know, when anyone, you don't have to be in a pregnancy crisis to understand that you're going to see the glass half empty in a moment of despair, in a moment of unexpected.
Yeah.
And that is a very natural response. And so what you've just explained, and you've proven it with the fact there, and me too, or, you know, from different clients, that is typical. You know, the mum wishes that the daughter had have told her. The daughter wishes now she had it as well, but fear ruled the day with a hypothetical, which was very glass half empty. And that's where these spaces that are not pressuring, like there's nothing pressuring, or you know, often the pregnancy help can be seen as somewhere that has an agenda, when really all of the workers are very professional in the way that they are there to provide, you know, support that has got no agenda attached to it, unbiased. They're trained to just listen so that that client will come and feel safe to just share. And that's the most powerful aspect of everything that we do in community, isn't it, wherever you go?
I think when you listen, particularly in a situation of pregnancy crisis, similarly to the abortion trauma, when you listen, when you allow someone to share, you're actually validating them. And in pregnancy crisis, the loss hasn't occurred yet, but in the abortion trauma, the loss has occurred. So that, but you're actually rehumanizing someone. Either way, you're empowering them. You're giving them back their human dignity. You're giving them back their voice. What do we say? The listening ear to the suffering voice. You know, it's really important, because it's not until they start to get it out that it becomes that clarity and honesty with self.
And on a scale, like, if you were in a room with many people and you said something like, on a scale of, you know, 1 to 5, how often do you really feel heard? And I've been in different classes where it's been quite eye-opening to see the response of those who have attended, because almost even in their families, it's really rare to have that occasion where someone is going to take the position of the listener and allow you to be the speaker. And that gift that you're talking about that happens over the phone or in a counselling room is full of dignity, because we live in a world where that opportunity to just be listened to is not common. And a lot of, you know, out of the goodness of their heart, many people, they do believe, oh, if someone's sharing something sad, they think the best thing for me to say is, that happened to me too, and da-da-da-da-da-da, but straight away there's that, this person's not being listened to anymore. And that is the beauty and the need through any life-changing disruptive event, any difficult event that someone's going through in their life. They need to know where are those places in the community that they can call that they can go to. And an unplanned, difficult pregnancy, or a pregnancy that is unexpected, regardless of what you're facing, prenatal diagnosis, it can be a multitude. You might have had a planned pregnancy and then halfway through your partner's lost their job. Something else has happened, or there's been another loss, and everything's crumbling and you just can't see your way through this. Those are the moments you make the opportunity, you take the time to seek support and see what's available and be heard, you know.
It's an interesting point too, because when people talk about planned and unplanned pregnancies, you always attach pregnancy crisis to unplanned or, you know, unwanted. But in the case of, you know, whether it's planned or not planned, I think that pregnancy is often a shock. Nothing prepares you for the feelings of parenthood. And so, you know, I have, you know, dealt with a woman who had gone through in vitro fertilisation and then had an abortion. And people go, oh, well, why would they do that to them? You know, to their, you know, go to that effort to become pregnant. And it was all to do with the crisis surrounding the pregnancy. So what was planned then turned into, it did change, and it turned into a dreadful and terrifying crisis for this woman who was unable to share because of the situation that she felt head stuff again she had got herself into, and was relatively unsupported. So you know, I don't think it matters if it's planned or unplanned. Pregnancy crisis can exist, you know, in either of those two scenarios, just with the nature of what pregnancy is, really.
And that's possibly where the wording and the language that the network of the Pregnancy Help, they try and sometimes crisis, you know, people think it has to be this major crisis, and they're not actually sensing that, oh no, this is a place they can go to just to discuss anything. So it is also important that we think of new ways where we can educate, which is what you're doing right now. So that's really good. But you know,
we're trying.
But you also made the point which made me think, oh, you know, it really is just about support for motherhood and fatherhood, because how many first times in our life did we have where there's a moment of transition, you know, the first day of school or the first time you're driving a car, you know, you're nervous, it's unknown, and you need people around you to be your support network, to give you courage through those hard times. And it is hard. Pregnancy is difficult. There's a bit of loss too, because if it's your first pregnancy, you know, almost overnight, well, you're no longer an independent single person. You're responsible, and you may not be able to have that glass of wine straight away. There's a lot of sacrifice. There's a lot of loss of dreams, and some of them are closed. But then talking to someone, you can see, actually, is there a way for me to identify what my dreams for the future are? And is it possible to accomplish those dreams and strive towards them, and at the same time continue with this pregnancy? And that's a big one that it comes back to, is that women are feeling in that moment, and even the fathers, they're feeling like, my dreams for my future are now shattered, which is actually another glass half empty fear.
Exactly. Almost like pregnancy and compromise are in some way connected, where there actually should be not. You know, just because you're pregnant doesn't mean there has to be compromise. There is looking at it as the glass half full rather than empty. And I think something you were saying before, this is why the abortion decision and the process of that interests me so much, because as I'm listening to you talk, it's not an area that people explore. It's not an area that people discuss, but it's an area that's so very harshly judged. And it's something that everybody has an opinion on or projects their opinion to, but nobody really goes to understand it. And so I think shedding light on pregnancy crisis also shed lights on understanding the abortion decision. It's like you said earlier, no two pregnancy situations are the same. It is unique. And so when we're working through abortion trauma, the path to healing is unique to each individual person. And the reason for that is always to do with the person's pregnancy crisis, is always to do with the person's history. Not just to do with pregnancy, just to do with life in general. And so it's a very important area to explore, so that we can, you know, give women the strength and the empowerment to be able to share, to be able to talk, to be able to work through, to be able to step back and, okay, we use the word crisis, but step back and say, okay, what is the situation? Very calmly lay it out.
It's a moment of honour, isn't it? Do I honour myself enough to go, this is how many times in my life am I going to be pregnant? You may only be once. This is a major life event. Am I going to honour myself enough to actually go to someone who I can trust, who's going to listen to me and allow me that space to really explore my feelings and explore my pathways through this, so that I know which one I can choose, like what's going to make my heart sing, and am I looking at everything, and am I knowing what to expect? If I do open that door to an abortion, do I know what that looks like for me? Am I ready? If I'm going to order that abortion pill, am I ready for what that means I'm going to experience on the other side, or when I go home? What does that look like? Do I have all that information? That's honouring ourselves, because mental health goes downhill when you aren't prepared, when then trauma can enter in. If you're prepared with all the knowledge, the right to know, which you're doing, that is the safeguard to living a flourishing life.
And not being left with more questions than answers, which is what leads to the unfortunate position of abortion trauma. So if you have a woman who's facing pregnancy crisis, do you have a formal set of strategies with crisis counselling, or that you work through, or that they can work through? Is there some sort of structure?
Yeah, I mean, look, there are a multitude of pregnancy help centres across Australia, not multitude, and everyone is independent, so they might have they all have their own in-house training. And predominantly it's based on your 101 counselling, and there's an amazing doctor in the US, Dr. Peggy Hartshorn, and she wrote The Love Approach, in very simple steps for lay people to become equipped in how to really listen with love, how to really open those options, how to really then take the vision that belongs to that client that they've given you, and open that vision that they had, and then extend and empower. What we've done here in Australia through the Pregnancy Help Network is we've taken that foundational model, but we've put it together with professional life coaching. So our model is based on the coach approach, which the tools then are the same. Your first part that's so important in anyone who comes to you is that you're giving the space for them to speak, to share. You're not adding comments in, you're listening, you're opening up. They say something, what does that look like? Well, tell me more. Say more about that. Allowing them to bring it all out. Because that's the lost art in our society, and that's where people then go and do something hastily. And they, but in that space it's quite, it's hidden, but there's something really powerful going on for that person, because they're finally able to identify, I just said that's actually how I'm feeling. Until they hear it, because at the moment it's just all been stuck in their head. So there's that process of it's quite a lot of training. So anyone who comes to volunteer or work in a centre or on the phone line, it's a good 8 to 12 week course. So it's quite really comprehensive. All these years, it's not counselling what we do, it's not top down, it's not advice, it's not direction. We are walking alongside in partnership with the client in a creative and thought-provoking process. And we're not, it's non-judgmental, it's person-centred.
I like what you call, the coach approach.
Yeah.
What a wonderful name.
But see, that's not even us, that's just what's out there. And I think it's not until you even study that side of what coaching actually means, you go, wow, this is actually what we've been doing in the community and voluntary sector for years. Walking alongside without bias, without judgment, and with full focus on the person who has come seeking support and giving that dignity. And then, of course, from that first moment, that's the first tool, because in that moment, you're building relationship, you're building trust with that client. And as you're listening to them, they realise, hey, you don't have an agenda, you're not telling me what to do, you're not listening to what I say and then all of a sudden talking about some other scenario. You're really listening to me and I feel safe, I'll share more. And then there's tools which are based on powerful questioning, and they are usually beginning with a what question, because those questions, based on what has been shared already, will allow that client to rise above the circumstance that they've just shared and be able to just have an eagle-eye view. Well, just say 5 years from now, what would it look like? Certain questions that will really encourage this deep reflection, so nothing is missed out with the choice that they make forward. And that's where you've got you can start exploring pathways. So it sounds like you by that stage you might like to continue with your pregnancy, but you're really concerned about the fact that your partner doesn't have a job or you haven't finished your studies. What could let's have a look at, let's explore what we can do around that. And then, as you're talking, certain options pop up. That if they were going to go, look, I'm still talking to you and I'm still here, I'm at abortion, okay, you're considering abortion quite strongly right now. However, you've said this and you've said this, and they might have shared something which shows their maternal heart. I mean, if they've spoken about their love for children or whatever, that it all comes out and you can say, but I can see this is a really difficult decision for you. Because, you see, you look after your sister's children, your sister's pregnant right now. Different things unique to whatever they've shared. But just not to be fearful to explore that option. We're not condoning in our space, because we're not there to provide abortions or refer for abortions, but we're certainly there to allow that dignified space for someone to go, well, what does this look like? If I really go there, what is it going to look like? What am I going to expect? And these are the questions I have. Will you help me answer them? If we're too scared to go there as a society, then we're not really doing our job as a community that safeguards, because then these women are opening the door to a situation that, as we all know, can be devastating, can have extremely sad outcomes. And we're all about, as a society, I believe, promoting the best outcomes. We want the best outcomes for women who are experiencing an unexpected pregnancy.
Such a valuable resource and set of skills to be able to give women, because one woman that I was talking to, it was a medical professional, said to her, the clock's ticking and you can't afford time, and that pressure is what sent somebody to make a decision that was life-altering for them and did impact the mental health outcomes for her. Now, had had that not been said, had the doctor possibly had more awareness and understanding of that impact that it would have on the woman, it may not have happened, but the result was, you know, a lifelong sentence for this poor woman who's obviously working through her healing journey now. But still, there's that constant, the one constant that comes up regularly in any discussions regarding the abortion decision is time.
Exactly.
Time, and the pressure of time, and what you're explaining in terms of a strategy associated with you know, a crisis is just to take the focus off the time, but to focus on the not be devoid of it, because obviously, you know, it is there, you know, for people, but to maybe look at other things besides a ticking clock.
Again, it all comes down to our society. If we care about choice, you cannot own a choice if you don't have one indicator. One of them is, a number of indicators, but one of them is due reflection. Due reflection is time. Now, unfortunately, we do live in a country where often that pressure is put upon women within a clinical environment. And that's the one thing I've noticed from most of the first phone calls I have with women that have somehow found our centre or found our helpline. That word say, you've got time. You've got time. You know, look at, and sometimes they're not really even quite sure, you know, of the gestation, you know, and it's so early on, and just to have those conversations, is the pregnancy confirmed? Let's have a look, you know, do you know how far along? And just speaking about that and allowing them to speak about it and sit in a normal part of pregnancy. Those are conversations that haunt you later on if you haven't had, and we don't know, maybe you're not going to have another child, maybe you'll have another 2, maybe you'll be really, you know, have many, but it is a rarity in a woman's life. It is an extremely sacred moment to experience pregnancy. So regardless of whether it's in the midst of a crisis or whatever surrounding circumstances, everyone deserves to have that time to honour this amazing moment in their life.
It's interesting how if you do just talk to someone initially, they've picked up the call, which we've both had these experiences. The person's come through and so courageous, because it's a big deal just to call. For some people just to call.
Exactly.
And when you just listen and say, you know, this is the line that you call, you listen, you actually slow everything down just by the action of listening and allowing them to speak. And it's funny how in half an hour to 45 minutes, you know, your regular time for a call, how that can sometimes seem like 2 hours, because time has just slowed down, and that person and their experience that they're in has been validated, and they've been given that moment to breathe.
Exactly.
And in that motion of breathing, whether it's a pregnancy crisis situation or is an abortion crisis situation, whereas the person is post-abortive, they have been given a space where time has stopped for them, and that's very empowering, because it does help them to get out of the head stuff that they've been going through, generally very much alone, and sometimes get a little bit in touch with the heart stuff, which can be painful, but at the same time, just allowing, even on a minuscule level, that ability to explore something and breathe makes the world of difference, you know, to that person. It's so powerful. Very powerful.
And that's where, that, you know, that gift of time listening and being that maternal or paternal presence where there's a warmth that comes in that environment. You know, and you can't explain it, but there's a warmth when you're received with an act of love. And that is genuinely what we are equipped to do. Anyone who works in after abortion support or pregnancy help, they're equipped to respond with the simple act of love. And there are ways to learn how to do that if you're nervous, but we're all called. Like if we care about mothers, if we care about fathers, we care about people in all of our patches where we are. We're all called to be ready, to be that soft ground for someone to come and rest upon and speak and be heard. You know, it's not that hard, but it seems to be so lacking in our society.
It is. You know, we're so connected and yet we're so isolated at the same time.